If you use Claude Code and you've ever hit a wall in the middle of a project where Claude just stops and tells you, sorry, you've used your weekly limit, this video is going to fix that for you permanently. Most people blow through their usage limits, not because the limits are too tight, but because they're using Claude all wrong. They don't understand what a token is. They don't understand context window. They write sloppy prompts and they treat Claude Code like a chat app when it's so much more than that. So, in the next 20 minutes, I'm going to give you the exact framework I use to get way more work done on the same plan. Tokens, context windows, prompts, MD files, model routing, the whole thing, crash course style. Okay, so let's go. Quick intro on me if you're new here. I run a couple of businesses and I work as an AI consultant, meaning companies pay me to come in and figure out how to actually make money with this stuff, not just play with it. So, everything that I'm about to teach you isn't just theory, it's what I use in my client work and in my own projects every single week. And here's the thing, the people who learn to manage their tokens properly, they're not just saving money on their subscriptions. They're the people who can actually build real solutions with AI, ship faster than everyone else, and actually charge money for what they make. And that's the whole name of the game. Real quick, before we dive in, the AI space moves fast. Anthropic tweaks limits, context windows get bigger, pricing shifts. So I'm going to focus on the principles, not the specific numbers, because the principles hold up no matter what they change next month, and they will change something. But the specific numbers you can always look up. The way of thinking is what actually compounds. So let's start at the foundation. What is a token? A token is just a unit of currency that Claude uses to read and write. That's it. Every time you send a message, every time Claude responds, every file it reads, all of that gets chopped up into tokens. And that's what counts against your limits. Okay. So, roughly speaking, one token is about 4 characters. Okay. 4 English characters. So, an English word is a little over 1 token on average. And, a page of text, a couple hundred tokens, a medium sized code file, few thousand tokens. Okay. So that's the unit. Now let's talk about the container, which is the context window. And this is a big one. If you take nothing else away from this video, take this. Okay. Listen closely. The context window is the single biggest reason you are hitting your rate limits. All right. And most people don't even know what it is. So as of today, Claude's context window is in, the hundreds of thousands, except for Opus 4.7 up to 1 million. And that's the working memory for a single conversation. Okay. And these windows have been getting bigger and bigger every year. So by the time you're watching this, the exact number might be a lot larger, but it doesn't really matter. Like I said, the principle is the same. So think of it like a whiteboard. Everything Claude knows in that session has to fit on the whiteboard. Okay? Your messages, Claude's responses, every file it reads, every tool output, every error message, all of it is on the same whiteboard. Now, here's the part about context window that most people miss completely. Every time you send a new message, Claude doesn't just process that one message, okay? It reprocesses the entire conversation history that came before it. So your first message, Claude's first response, your second message, Claude's second response, etc. All of it. Every single turn gets fed back in as input tokens. Every single time. Okay? So let that sink in and let's talk about a specific example. So message number 20 in a long chat, it isn't just one message worth of tokens. It's 19 prior messages plus the new one. So that's why, your long conversation burns through your limit so fast. It's not that the messages are getting bigger, it's that the same conversation is getting resent over and over and over again, with each subsequent turn becoming heavier than the last. So let's break down the math on this. If one turn costs you X amount of tokens, then the fifth turn in that conversation would cost you 5 times X amount of tokens because you're resending turns 1 through 4 with that fifth message. The 10th turn costs you 10 times X amount of tokens, and the 20th turn, 20X, just for one message. So across 20 turns, that's 200 times the amount of tokens as just that first message. And, 20 turns, it might seem like a short chat, but the reality is you're just burning through tokens. So the answer to your question, why do I keep hitting my limit? It's not because Claude sucks or Anthropic is greedy. It's because you're paying essentially like compound interest on every single message in a long session. And a bloating context window, it isn't just slower or dumber. It's actively more expensive every single turn. And the fix to this, honestly, the easiest thing to do is just start a new session. And we'll get to exactly when to do that in a minute. But first, let's talk about 2 different slash commands, okay? 2 commands to know. The first one, slash context, that shows you where your tokens are going right now. Your system prompt, tool schemas, memory files, conversation history, etc. And if you type slash clear, that wipes the entire conversation and starts fresh. So your files are still on the disk. Claude can reread them if needed, but you're clearing the noise on Claude's current whiteboard, okay? Before we go any further, let's talk about prompts, because the prompt is where most people leak tokens without even knowing it. And a good prompt isn't about being clever. It's just about being specific and structured and lean, like a statement of work you'd write for a contractor. So let's break down this framework for prompting. There's 5 parts, okay? Goal, role, format, constraints, and tone. And this is the 5-part framework I use every time I'm writing a prompt that's like important, that actually matters, okay? 5 pieces, memorize them, and your prompts will get so much better basically overnight, and you'll burn way less tokens, more importantly. So let's walk through each component briefly. So the first one, goal. What are you actually trying to accomplish, right? So people will input things like rewrite this email, but that's quite vague, right? It doesn't say how you want the email to be rewritten. Do you want to, follow up for a specific reason? Are you responding? What's the actual goal of rewriting the email? Because specific goals will get specific focused outputs, and vague goals will get vague outputs. And you're leaving it up to probability at that point. So to get good outputs, you have to clearly specify the goal. Next is role. So who do you want Claude to be while doing this task, right? And roles work because they activate different patterns within Claude, right? You tell Claude, be a senior security engineer reviewing this code, and you'll get a very different output than if you just said review the code, right? They also save tokens because they front load context instead of having Claude do a task and then, explaining what you care about after the fact, right? The next is format. So what does the output actually look like? Do you want it in a certain, pattern or structure? Do you want it in a certain file type, a bulleted list, etc.? That one's a bit more straightforward, but you want to be specific with the format we want. All right. Next, constraints. So what are the actual rules and limits? These are the guardrails, right? Keep it under 50 lines. Don't modify any of these files. Don't use this package, etc. Okay? And Constraints are very important because it prevents you from having to, iterate with Claude after Claude produces a wrong answer for what you're looking for and having to redo it and waste more and more tokens. Okay. And the fifth one is tone. So this one matters less for coding than for content or writing, but it still kind of applies, right? Like if you said explain this like I'm a junior dev, skip the pleasantries versus match the existing comment style in the file, right? These tones actually shape the pros around the code, and it will dictate your output and where your output tokens are actually going. So hit all five and your prompts will dramatically improve. As an action item, just take this framework, write a prompt right now. Give it a try. And then two additional bonus tips to add on top of that. The first one is regarding reference files. So reference files are great, but don't ever paste them in. Okay. Stop pasting in these whole files into your messages. Tell Claude the file path, where the file is located at, and then Claude Code will read the file on its own. Because when you paste it in, you're putting the same content into the window twice, which means you're paying for it twice. Okay. So just point to the file. The second one is one task per prompt. Don't say add a login page, refactor this database, and write some unit tests for this use case all in the same message, right? Because Claude is going to be doing each one not that well. He'll kind of half do all three. And each of those tasks is important. So they should be on, their own focused term, right? Better output, fewer rework cycles, fewer tokens. One more bonus. If you've been online in the AI or Claude space in the past few months, you've probably seen people talking about something called caveman mode. So let me explain what it actually is, because it is real and it does work. Caveman mode is effectively just a prompting style that you can turn on with Claude, where Claude will drop the articles, drop the pleasantries, and just strip it down to subject, verb, object in his responses. So talking like a caveman would talk, or how you'd expect one to talk, in a movie or something like that. And it does result in a significant amount of token savings. So, use this where you see fit. Of course, certain use cases you aren't going to want to have caveman mode on, but consider it another tool in your arsenal to reduce overall token consumption. Next, let's talk about the different types of tokens, because they come in a few different flavors. All right. And each flavor costs very different amounts. And this is where people lose money without even realizing it. So the three different types of tokens are input tokens, output tokens, and cache tokens. Input tokens are everything that you send to Claude, okay? Your prompt, your conversation history, files Claude reads. These are the cheap ones. Next, we got output tokens, what Claude generates. Code, explanations, responses, and as a general rule of thumb, output tokens cost roughly 5 times what input tokens cost. So when Claude writes 300 lines of code for you, you're going to burn through way more tokens than when it reads 300 lines of code. Okay? Keep that in mind. Now, next, the cache tokens. Okay? So pay attention to this, because this is important. Cache tokens are like the secret weapon, right? When you reuse the same context, Claude can cache it on the server, and a cache read costs a small fraction of a regular input token. Okay. We're talking a massive discount on anything that gets cached. And here's how it actually works. So the first time that you send a chunk of content, Claude writes it to the cache. Okay. And that write costs slightly more than a normal input token. And then every time you hit that same content again within the cache window, you only pay a fraction of the price. And here's the part you have to know about, okay? As of today, Anthropic gives you two cache windows: a short one measured in minutes and a longer one measured about an hour, okay? And the short cache is the default. So after a few minutes of inactivity, your cache expires. And the next time you send content, you pay the full right price all over again. And here's the kicker. Earlier this year, Anthropic quietly changed the default Claude Code cache from longer window down to the shorter one. And a lot of people who had never hit their limits before in their lives suddenly started hitting them. And every time they walked away from their terminal to get coffee, take a call, etc., they came back to an expired cache, and the next prompt they wrote everything from scratch. So now those exact cache windows, the lengths, might shift again if Anthropic changes this, but the principle itself will hold. So keep up to date on what those windows are, right? Because this is important if you don't want to, burn through tokens unnecessarily. So when you're working in Claude Code, work in focused, continuous sessions. Don't take a long break and then come back expecting the cache to still be warm. And if you know you're going to step away, close the session and come back fresh. Let Claude and your MD files and your other files that you need, reload them deliberately, right? Not just everything. Next, let's talk about MD files. So MD files are markdown files, and they're at the root of your project that Claude Code reads at the start of every session. Okay? This is persistent memory across sessions. This is where you need to put the stuff that Claude needs to know every single time. So if you're not using MD files, this is why you keep having to tell Claude everything Claude needs to know every time you start up a session. All right. And the easiest way to create one is to run a slash command slash init, initialize, init, inside your project. And Claude analyzes whatever is there, detects, your collection of files, and then generates a starter MD file, and you can refine it from there. So what actually goes into an MD file? Few things. What the project actually is, just 1 or 2 sentence summary. The tools and platforms you use as a part of the project, okay? Your voice or style or rules, rather, depending on, what the project is. Common commands or actions that you run repeatedly in that project. Any hard rules or constraints, never touch this folder, always do X before Y before Z, etc. And then, any edge cases that might come up that you want Claude to be aware of. So, what do you not put in an MD file? You should not put an entire collection of documentation files. You should not put super long code samples. You should not put stale old notes that aren't relevant, okay? Because that will bloat the MD file and waste tokens for you, right? So these MD files should be short, specific, readable by a human, and generally, under a couple thousand tokens, right? This should be like a sticky note with the high level points, not a manual. So to make this concrete, let's say you run a residential cleaning business, like I do, and you're using Claude Code to manage a project that handles, a variety of things. So this is what your Claude MD file might look like. Take a second to review. All right, that's it. About 150 words, but every session Claude knows what the project is, what tools I'm using, how to talk to clients, what rules to never break, where Claude has tripped up in the past, etc. And You stop paying tokens to re-explain yourself every time. And because the MD file gets cached after the first message, after that first message, it doesn't cost you anything on the subsequent messages. And this works whether you're running a cleaning business, a law firm, a SaaS product, etc. Doesn't matter. The principle is the same, okay? Write down the things that don't change once so you don't have to keep paying to repeat them. All right, now let's talk about skills. So most people stop at the Claude MD file, but if you a real G, you're going to take it a level deeper, okay, and go into the skills. So inside your project, you create a folder called .claude/skills. All right? Inside that folder, you write markdown files that describe recurring workflows, things that you have to do a lot, right? And these are playbooks that Claude follows automatically when the situation comes up. So each skill is just another markdown file, right? And the way to structure these, the first line describes what the skill is for. The rest is your step-by-step instructions. So Claude will scan the names and descriptions, and when something matches the task at hand, it loads the full skill on demand. And until then, until that trigger is met, those instruction costs you aren't paying for, right? Because they're not in the context window. So let's bring up a example here and take a look. So one quick action item after this video, give writing a skill a try, for your own use case, for your own business, whatever it is you want to apply Claude to. See how it goes. Now let's get into model routing. So one thing that I see is a fair amount of people will just run Opus for every single task that they're asking Claude to do. And you might be thinking, I don't even know what Opus is. And that's okay, because I'm about to teach you. So Opus is Anthropic's most powerful model, and it's also dramatically more expensive than the other models, multiple times the cost per token. So it's overqualified for a lot of what you're going to do. So it's important to understand the model tiering options so you can choose the appropriate tool for the task and, spend tokens accordingly. So the three tiers are Haiku, which is the lowest. This is fast and cheap. Save it for, the more simple stuff. Next is Sonnet. This is going to be your default, right? Like 80% of the time you should be using Sonnet day to day. And the third is Opus, okay? This is the heavy artillery, right? If you're going to be doing really complex, real reasoning, difficult tasks, use Opus. Save it for the moments that actually move the needle, right? So the general rule is default to Sonnet, maybe plan in Opus or escalate to Opus when Sonnet isn't cutting it, okay? Drop to Haiku for anything simple and mechanical, etc. And in Claude Code, you can switch models mid-sessions with the /model command. So make sure you're doing that. One little bonus tip. No one really talks about this, but you don't have to do all your AI work in Claude Code. You don't have to do all your AI work in Claude, because the Claude usage limit is a budget. And there's a whole lot of other AI tools sitting next to it with their own daily usage limits completely for free that you're probably not using, right? So ChatGPT has a free tier, Gemini has a free tier, Grok has one. All these major labs are giving away a meaningful amount of daily compute for users, and the specifics might shift, but the principles hold the same. So here's the game. You got to use the free tiers for everything that happens before Claude Code touches your project. All right? So you're brainstorming, use ChatGPT free for that. You're drafting an MD file, use Gemini until you're out of usage there, and then shuffle. So designing a prompt, test it on the free version of whatever model you want. And then by the time you actually open up Claude Code and you've got a polished prompt and a clear plan and good MD files, you haven't even touched your Anthropic limit yet. So all that work was free. And this isn't about replacing Claude or replacing Claude Code, right? That's still where we want to do the real building. But it's about being smart with your most expensive tier and using the free stuff for thinking, right? Save the paid stuff for shipping. So the general workflow: brainstorm and plan on ChatGPT, Gemini, one of the free ones, right? Draft your MD files there. And then when you're executing your actual build, use Claude Code. And the result is your Claude budget only pays for the part that matters. Final topic is when to start a new session. So if you remember the math from earlier, message 20 in a long chat costs you 19 messages worth of reprocessing every single turn. So when do you actually start a new session? Here are some common signals that you should. So the first is you're switching tasks. You just finished setting up, an email template or something like that, and now you want to work on the client database. Different problem, different files. So the conversation history from the email work, it's just noise. So start fresh. Signal number 2, context is over 60%. So you look at the bottom of your terminal in Claude Code, it'll show you your context usage as a percentage. And if you're past 60%, you're working with essentially a degraded version of Claude Code and paying a lot of that compound interest on your tokens. So it's best to start fresh at that point. Signal number 3, Claude starts making weird mistakes. So you've probably experienced this. Claude forgets instructions you just gave it, or repeats itself, or contradicts itself, and you're wondering what the heck is going on. It's not a Claude problem, it's a context window problem. So window is full, start a new session. Signal number 4 is if you're going to step away for more than 5 minutes. So if you're taking a real break, the cache, it's going to expire anyways. It's better to end the session deliberately and, write a quick summary or note to yourself about where you left off. Maybe throw that in an MD file for next time, and then come back fresh to start fresh instead of, starting stale. Signal number 5, you're stuck in a loop. So Claude has tried fixing a problem 1, 2, 3 different times, and each time it doesn't work. At this point, don't try again a 4th time. Just, copy out what you need and start a new session, because there's already that, bias effectively in that current session that's preventing that issue from being fixed. Here's why it's important for you to get this right. Companies aren't paying for AI tools. They're paying for outcomes that they can get with AI. Okay? And the person who's actually disciplined about Claude best practices and AI best practices when it comes to token usage is going to obliterate the person who's not, and then just blames it on Anthropic. Okay? So these fundamentals, tokens, context window, prompt engineering, prompting best practices, they're the difference between AI being a toy, something that's fun to play with and use, and AI being an actual income stream. And it doesn't matter whether you're building your own product or freelancing or consulting. Remember that ye who controls his tokens controls his destiny. If you got value from this, hammer that subscribe button. I post Claude tutorials and teach people how to make and save money with AI. My website is also linked in the description. You can book a one-on-one session with me or reach out about, consulting or partnerships. And One last thing, I'm putting together a community for people who are serious about making money with Claude. It is launching soon. Link will be in the description when it is live. That's it. Have a wonderful day.